right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the TSG podcast. I am once again joined by the owner and founder of the Strength Guys themselves, Jason. Thank you for coming on.
Hello, nice to be here.
Yeah, we had you on at the very beginning, episode 2, but really it was the first real episode. You came on and kind of gave an overview to everyone of kind of how we came through powerlifting, what the state of powerlifting is right now, and kind of what we think the future of powerlifting is going to be like going forward. And that was a hit episode. Seems like everyone liked it, so it's good that you can come back on again. And this time, I would say it is a little bit more specific rather than broad with this topic. It's like we'll dive a little bit deeper more into the athlete specifically rather than like the sport in general. So I guess I'll kind of kick it off to you first if you want to kind of give your initial thoughts on this idea of an athlete's training strategy and how you kind of decide what strategy to use for someone when they first start up with you.
Yeah, so I think an athlete's training strategy is informed by more things now than it ever has been throughout powerlifting. If you think 30, 40, 50 years ago, our training strategy would be informed by what we see from those around us and maybe what we'd read in a magazine. And with information becoming more available and the sport becoming more popular in, on an international level, uh, I think if anything, there's too much information, and it's a challenge of understanding how to interpret that and what to base your training strategy off of. And for me, a lot of the training strategy, I'd say almost all of it, is based around the dose response relationship, not only as it pertains to improving performance, but also as it relates to how an injury could come about. Um, and I think that powerlifting now, with this week 1 to week 4 concept, um, really seems like glorified ego lifting in many ways. Just posting big top sets at the end of a block and, pumping your chest and snarling on Instagram and stuff. I think it's kind of far away from where sports science has been trending towards for decades and where it's at now. Um, I think where it's at now is like there's a certain stimulus that's required to increase strength or to build muscle. And I think that stimulus consists of the exercise that you do, um, how heavy you lift, um, how many reps you perform for how many sets, how well you perform this overall, like your execution of the stimulus, and then how often you're performing it. So what we have there is really the old fit model that we were taught in personal training school way back when. It's frequency, intensity, and then we have volume, and we have the exercise type that you're doing. And there is a certain stimulus that's required to achieve meaningful adaptations that will result in performance improvement. However, I think what many powerlifters and training approaches and coaches are missing is that meaningful adaptations and performance improvement could be happening uh, as a result of changes in multiple tissues. And meanwhile, the approach to training over the long term could also be breaking down that tissue that's just not quite recovering in time from session to session, week to week, block to block, and cycle to cycle, even after competitions. And overall, this is where we see repetitive stress injuries come about. And so, with ideas such as very high frequency training, the popularization of elite powerlifting, and kind of, redlining it with your top set intensity in week 4 and pushing block after block to keep up with what others are doing on the internet. I think we're just kind of losing sight of periodization and why that exists. And I think the strongest reasons for me for why periodization exists are because when we have that variation in how we're training, we can manage the workload demands for all tissues to hopefully reduce the risk of repetitive stress injury. And then the other great advantage is that it allows us to systematically progress our workload over time. And so these are the bases of how TSG is training.
Yeah, you just threw out a lot of info there for the listeners, a lot of good info there. So let's go back and kind of go through some of these points again. First thing, I agree with you that, if we go back, the more decades we go back, it's not that there was no information out there. It's just that maybe there was less information out there and harder to access that information. So oftentimes people who go to the gym maybe just copy their buddy that takes them to the gym, or you find some kind of jacked person at the gym or someone you want to look like, and you ask them like, hey, what do you do for training, and you just copy what they're doing. And even then, when you go into maybe specifically bodybuilding or specifically powerlifting, maybe you're still copying whoever's like the best powerlifter in your gym or in your town that you may met up with or something like that. So a lot of times it's kind of just like anecdotal evidence, or maybe you find a magazine. The magazine oftentimes shows the training program of like some popular person, and you copy that. Now we've kind of gone to, did you want to add something to that?
No, I completely agree, and um, I think there's still versions of that going on right now. It's just now it's a compilation of how you see your favorite lifters training, and it just seems not ideal to me. It seems like a style of training which someone would do when they haven't yet seen the consequences of their actions over the long term. And so uh, when I think back about when we started coaching, there's not that many coaches who were, I'd say, coaching at a prominent level before 2016, who are still in this now, whether that's because of coach burnout or just deciding to go do something else or not being viable. I don't know what the reason is. But when you look at the coaches who've been doing this for over a decade at a prominent level, they're all advocating for periodized approaches to training. And I feel like wisdom of the masses can be useful, but wisdom of the experienced and educated masses is more useful. And yeah, it's interesting to see how the pendulum of training shifts over time.
Yeah, and not everything is completely changed from back then to what we will go now, which is what you're kind of saying as well. It's not that it's like all completely now, all the information out there and all based on research. You still have this issue where there's too much information maybe out there, like you said, and the information can be in different areas. So it depends on, hey, do you want to go based on what exercise science degree says? Do you want to go based on what the research says? Do you want to go based off of what all people's training on social media? Do you want to go based now on, if you ask AI and it compiles everything on the internet for you, what does it give you? So there's like so much information out there in these different areas. And yeah, there's still some people out there that just go see what their favorite social media influencer is doing. They try and see what their training is for the week and just copy, oh, they did this cool exercise. Maybe I should do pause squats with change to, some to a box or something crazy like that they saw on the internet.
I think um, we have to be really careful of accepting completely information when someone's trying to sell us something at the same time. And that's Instagram, like trying to acquire attention, trying to engage people through polarized opinions, trying to sell a service, whether it directly or softly. And it's like that's our main source of learning now, and I just think it's really not a good place to learn. It's a place of advertising and a place of attention seeking, and this is why I wanted to have this podcast, is where we could explore bigger ideas in long form. And you know, uh, if you want to get smart, read a book is a good start. Um, Not everyone's going to want to listen to a long form podcast breaking down ideas that you have to think about, but I think we're here to be the change that we want to see in our profession. And this is something that feels important, is still having quality long form coach communication, passing of knowledge through the generation style conversations.
Definitely. And I would say we've kind of experienced some of the stuff you're mentioning regarding social media with our own athletes. Because, for example, a lot of our athletes maybe have a tendency to not post all their training online, leading into a very important competition. So people who are following our athletes online might be like, oh, they're doing this for their training, but we really know behind the scenes that the training is actually different. So imagine everyone else out there posting training that's not actually the full thing they're doing, or maybe they're not posting the miss reps that they're doing or other things like that, which I also have experience with, like, for example, being a national team coach. And in the weeks leading up to a world championship, they had to fill out a weekly check-in of what they were doing for training. And sometimes in that check-in, you would hear or see the missed singles or this or that they're dealing with that they then don't post on social media for everyone else to see. Maybe after the championship, they come and say, hey, I got injured, or hey, I was sick, or hey, I missed a slip or something like that. But yeah, going in, someone who's just like following this person on Instagram is not going to know exactly the true story of everything that's going on.
Yeah, I think, like, if we rewind a couple of years ago, a comment that I've received on multiple occasions about how TSG trains is that what you guys do is like a black box. Like, when the outsider watches our athletes train online, they struggle to understand what we're doing. But then I'd say, like, if you saw the program, it's actually like there's a deep level of thought that goes into it, but it's extremely simple in its structure. Like, we're primarily training the main lifts because that's what we seek to improve at. Um, we're measuring how much training you're doing. We're progressing that over time uh, to a point. Like, when you're 50, 60, we're not still adding workload onto you cycle by cycle. Um, and we're following a later periodized structure where you do your heaviest training before the comp. Um, and I think the reason why it's difficult to understand that is because I think many powerlifters are just thinking about the short term. They're thinking about, how can I maximize what I do in this next competition? How can I line myself up in an optimal way to smash this block? And I think to execute our training process effectively, you're still thinking about the short term of getting better, but you also need to have more foresight. And inherently, like, viewing things as week one and week four is not an approach with much foresight, in my opinion. Like, that's just taking it month by month and seeing how things go. And I think when a coach chooses to only take things one block at a time, you know, there is a link between that and these coaches saying they have many clients. And for me, that raises some questions about, like, you know, if the coach was paid enough money to make all the money that they wanted with like 15 to 20 clients, would they still work that way? I don't know the answer to that, but it's kind of like the little cynical side of me and also the skeptical side of me. I'm like, feel like there may be better ways to do this, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes yeah, you do have to kind of think about the short term and maybe taking more risks. For example, if it's a junior's like last year, junior world is going on right now. Let's say it's their last year as a junior. They know they're aging out. They're going to start a job. Maybe powerlifting is going to be a lower priority. Maybe they're willing to like, hey, let's push training a little bit more and let's take on some more risks so I can perform better at this final competition. Or maybe you're like a master's four lifter and you're like, hey, listen, I'm not going to be getting stronger every single year. I'm not going to be able to bump up my work capacity every year. Let's try and push more for like this year to break some records like that. That's understandable. But, that's not every single person. Everyone who's listening to this podcast or everyone who is a client of ours doesn't fall in that category. A lot of people don't have maybe powerlifting as that high of a priority and maybe have many years ahead of them, but they're just focused on like, oh, I need to be top 10 next nationals and I need to do whatever it takes to get there rather than focusing on developing themselves over multiple years.
Yeah, and it seems to dwarf the expectations of people who are not amongst the elite. Like, I have a client who I've trained for 7 years now. He's probably going to squat 500 pounds within the next year. And he was being hard on himself one day, just talking about how he's so far away from like a certain dot score. And so I have a call with him, and we're talking about his views of what else is out there. And I explained to him how many kilograms he's added to his squat since we've started, and how some really reputable names in coaching and even athletes have tried to squat 500 and never done it. And it's like, that's a pretty freaking amazing accomplishment. And sure, the world record holder in your weight class is doing, 350 plus, but like, we genetics may be the most influential component in like competition placings, but you've got what you're born with. And so it's your choice on whether you're going to maximize that or not. And like, I think a lot of talk about training is just based on optimizing for the elite. And it's based on how the hyper responders of powerlifting respond. And I think we're just forgetting about, you know, most powerlifters who are getting better year by year. And like, y- how does their training strategy need to differ from the training strategy of a hyper responsive champion athlete in their prime? Because I do believe there are some differences there.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I saw on Reddit recently, and I can always throw the link down in the description of this podcast for people, is someone just took like the open powerlifting data for drug tested athletes and saw in 1 year's time how much that person progressed to kind of give you an idea of for you if you input in your specific numbers and your age and your body weight, how much should you progress in 1 year. And so I shared that with my teams, my clients group chat, so they could put in their numbers and see how much they're progressing in 1 year. And it's interesting to see. Again, it's just based on the data. That doesn't mean this is what the actual person is going to do, but instead of comparing yourself to an outlier, like, oh, let me compare myself to Austin Perkins or Taylor Atwood, it's like, let me compare myself to every single data point and open powerlifting to get more of a median or an average. And you can see, okay, it's saying in 12 months, maybe I might have put on 5 dots or 10 dots, maybe put on 5 kilos on my squat, 5 kilos on my deadlift, maybe 0 or 2.5 on my bench press. And that gives maybe people more realistic idea of what they should be expecting rather than thinking of these crazy numbers based on, someone that they have, nothing in common with.
Yeah, and I think as my career has progressed, I've started to uh, work with more and more M1 and M2 athletes, and it's an audience that I'm enjoying working with a lot because I think as a powerlifter progresses throughout their training career, um, there's going to be wear and tear that's incurred on the body, but you could either have less wear and tear if you've sustained less maladaptive events in the earlier years of your career, or you could have more wear and tear if you've had more injuries, more compensation injuries, some maybe long-term strength deficits crop up. Um, and so for me, M1 and M2 powerlifting is like almost a competition of like who's went about this in the most sustainable way, while still maintaining the effectiveness of training. Um, I have a client in Italy who just turned 50, and after his 50th birthday, Massimiliano hit an all-time PB, and it was like, man, like that's an age of life where like I could see adults in my life like take different turns, like some are crushing it and they're still out doing all the things they want, and like others are starting to have health issues, and like to see Massimiliano like still getting stronger and moving healthily, it's like that's really inspiring. There's something really cool about that. So, um, our group, as many of you know, consists of many professionals from around the world. And I think one of the great professionals of our group is Urban Mir of Slovenian powerlifting. And Urban was brought in by Scottish powerlifting to do a coach education talk to them. And Urban was one of, I think, 5 athletes who competed at 2016 Worlds that also competed at 2026 Worlds. So he's had a long career as an athlete. And in this presentation, he was talking about how in an athlete's peak years, their training capacity is often higher, which allows them to push harder and make more robust gains. However, as an athlete ages, wear and tear happens. Aging generally decreases training capacity over a long period of time. When they sustain injuries to certain areas, sometimes the training capacity in that area is not fully recovered. And so now we have a situation where an athlete in their peak may have trained with squat, bench press, deadlift, made awesome gains, won competitions, etc. But now they can't tolerate that anymore. And Urban's hypothesis for why is it's because specific areas that are stressed by those lifts no longer have the capacity to support the amount of main lift training that you used to do. And so, therefore, as you age, if you are one of the people who is accumulating more wear and tear, more injuries as you go, you need to begin to think differently about how you program for yourself. And you need to be more targeted with the movements that you're doing to stress specific areas while remaining within the capacity of other areas. And I thought it was just a very well done presentation by Urbana. And it was a very interesting point on how someone with over 10 years of lifting at an elite level has experienced things and how he views things.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So let me get your thoughts if we kind of take a step back from that first and say someone's listening to this podcast, they want to sign up with you for coaching, and let's say they're more of a beginner, 1 to 3 years of experience of powerlifting, and they sign up. What are the different variables that you're looking into in order to determine kind of that you said that training dose that they need to get stronger?
Yeah, so if someone starts out as a beginner, I would have them start out with like 2 or 3 sets of 5, 1 to 2 times per week on the main lifts. And I would have them warm up to a weight where they feel like they could do 15 reps with it. Um, and This isn't going to be precise because they're a beginner, but the point is that it should be really freaking easy. Uh, and ideally, it should be, you know, uh, a loadable increment, otherwise train with a junior barbell set or something for the time being. And uh, each week I would gradually add load onto them, but I would keep the load progression slow because I think that many lifters start off in powerlifting by just kind of going hard as heck, and not really taking the time to learn to do the movements in a skillful way. And with my clients who are beginner, I like to strongly emphasize performing the movements in a skillful way. So on squat, uh, even if you're a beginner, I expect your walkout within a couple of months to look like Kafui Hatsuyame's walkout does, which is very patient, which is very methodical, deliberate. He squats out of the rack. He lets the plate stop vibrating, takes a step back. He's like braced tight through his core. Plates aren't jiggling around and tilting back and forth. And he just takes it step by step, patiently getting into his stance, which is consistent from set to set. And I think Cafui's technique is exemplary in that way. And then from there, uh, I'd like to teach the lifter about posture. I expect you to be in a neutral posture, um, because if you're in an extended or a flexed posture, it's difficult to brace properly and to maximize torso stiffness. And the reason why that's important is because if your torso is kind of limp and all over the place, then the force that you're creating through your legs isn't going to fully transfer into the bar that's on your back. So the next thing would be teaching bracing. So neutral, how to engage your abdominals and obliques in a way that makes the torso more rigid, how to perform the Valsalva maneuver in a way that you're not bearing down on your pelvic floor, which in some women who train for a long time seems to lead to urinary incontinence issues. And then how to keep the bar over midfoot, hit depth. Like I go into the weeds and I take my time with it because on the other side, I feel like from what I've achieved in coaching, many very strong athletes have hired me and continue to hire me who come to me late in their career with a series of different injuries. And then I start to look at their movement and it's like, man, like X, Y, and Z are wrong with this movement. Like, this is something that I believe if you learned early on in your journey, you may not be dealing with the full slate of problems that you have now. So I try to take that perspective and give it to the beginner. And then from there, it's just progressive overload area. And when my sets of five become too difficult, I'll turn them into sets of four, sets of three, sets of two, sets of one, and keep adding weight until we find out where they're at. And then from there, in the next cycle, I try to progress their workload. I try to work up to more volume and eventually work up to more weight. And I just keep going like that. I think with TSG, the other thing is that we're measuring you from step one, right? So if there was a peak volume at 75 to 85% 1RM, where like you did this much work per week for like 3 to 4 weeks of loading, and that went particularly well, we could try to progress you by another 5% next time you do it. And odds are that's going to go pretty well for you too. So, this is how I would approach building someone up from the beginner level. And it's a audience that is challenging to work with online, but it's also one that I enjoy working with because I feel like I'm able to impart some of the perspective of having seen people who may not have taken the time, rush into powerlifting, get really strong, and then have a bunch of injuries, and potentially direct the beginner in a better way.
That's a interesting point that you made is that maybe a lot of people think that coaching or like serious, one-on-one individualized coaching is more for those high level athletes. Like, hey, once you're at such a high level and you need to progress even further, or you need someone to handle you at these big competitions, whatever, that's when you need coaching. But if you're like a complete beginner, they just say, hey, go in the gym and just lift, or go in the gym and just follow one of these free programs, or, one of these templates out there. And so it's interesting you're making the point that sure, there are some benefits to just going and doing a free programming and just go to the gym and start working out and being consistent. But there's also some downsides there that you maybe are ingraining these bad habits and getting these injuries early on that if you actually had a coach at the beginning, you can avoid. So maybe the coach is like just as important, if not more important, for that beginner person to get you on the right track from the very beginning.
Yeah, I think if you think about any other sport with development pathways too, like earlier years are focused on fostering enjoyment for the activity and building up different aspects of fitness that are required for it over time, but also heavy on technique development. Um, and I think because powerlifting can be so self guided, we just see that sometimes that's missing compared to sports with more traditional development pathways.
Yeah, like I think about for myself, I mostly played basketball as like my primary sport. And like from being a kid, yeah, at first it's like, hey, just have fun. A bunch of kids just running around, throwing the basketball around, just getting outside, having fun. But then, yeah, as you start getting older and you go more into it, it starts to become a little more structured. And it's a lot about, like you said, technique and drills, a lot about like dribbling with your dominant hand, dribbling with your non-dominant hand, dribbling with your eyes open, dribbling with your eyes closed, or just basics of like layups, just nonstop layups with your right hand, with your left hand on the right side of the basket and left side of the basket, and different running drills to kind of build up your conditioning. Hey, run half the court, then three quarters of the court, then the full court, and kind of build out conditioning. So you're learning all those technique and drills to build those fundamentals and be able to do those things like without even having to think about it or without having to have your eyes even open. And then you can learn the more challenging stuff on top of that. But yeah, like you said, for fitness and for powerlifting, it's a little bit more self-guided, people kind of getting into it, is like you maybe skip out a lot of those drills and you kind of just go straight to, hey, I put my feet somewhere, I put the bar somewhere on my back, and I just start squatting and then start lifting heavier and heavier weights.
What do you think the uh, equivalents are for powerlifting? Like, if we were to create a skill development model for powerlifting, what are the different skills which you'd want to instill in someone before they really got to the level where training was quite rigorous and intense, and approaching the better years of their athletic career?
I mean, I guess one of the first thing that comes to mind is just how to set up for each lift. And I think maybe Boris Chico maybe did that with like his athletes at the very beginning. Like as a super beginner program, if someone walks in the gym, you're not doing like 3 sets of five. You maybe are doing like 3 sets of how to sit up under the bar for the squat and walk out. And then once you walk down, sit up, you rack it again, and then you come back and you do it again. Get under the bar, walk it out, and just keep repeating that process until you kind of get down, like you said, for calfway, that kind of setup of how you're going to unrack, settle the weight, do your 3 steps, settle the weight, and get that down so that you always know, hey, this is where I'm going to grab the bar. This is how I'm going to unrack. This is the step I'm going to take back for my first step and kind of do my 3 steps.
Yeah, I think there's the technique aspect of it. So, how you set up for each lift, how you make stiffness in certain parts of your body and hold that throughout the lift, while also being mobile, and controlling the movement with other parts of your body. And then I think there's decision making. Um, so with that would be discipline first and foremost. And then also, I think being able to understand what your options are to navigate a different scenario, and to go about that in a way where you don't have setbacks, or you have less setbacks over time. And then I think at some basic level, I'd like to see that this athlete is curious about the training process and they understand why they are doing things. They don't have to be an expert, but I just think that the athlete shouldn't just blindly trust the coach, but they also don't need to direct the process themselves. They should understand why their plan is the way it is for them. And if they see other people doing A, B, and C on the internet, they'd still be able to take a step back and appreciate that their plan is designed for them because of these reasons. And they are not doing what they see others doing on the internet uh, because potentially they may be reckless practices uh, for the athlete at this current stage of their development, or because it's not serving a performance problem that the athlete has. So I think that's kind of like the equivalent to dribbling with both hands and how to shoot, how to pass, and how to pivot. And um, it's different because in basketball, all the things you've said are external to you, right? Whereas with powerlifting, a lot of it's internal, like being able to make stiffness in your torso while controlling the movement with your hips and legs. You know, it's just it's a unique sport in that way.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, creating the stiffness and like bracing properly, I think that's a common issue people have. Like I know for myself, I always had issues with leg drive on bench press, and that seems to be a common issue for people and how to kind of maintain their tightness on the bench and use their leg drive. For me as well, for deadlift, I had always issues with rounding my lower back a lot and my hips kind of tucking underneath me. And you see that a lot is maybe especially if someone's like sometimes a beginner who's like naturally good at deadlifts, then they just want to add more and more weight because they're naturally good at deadlifts and they don't have the technique. So you see someone's doing like a 400-pound deadlift, 500-pound deadlift, maybe something super strong, but with like a very rounded back and hips tucking underneath them. And then maybe they start hitching and stuff because they're not competing. They're just doing it in the gym. And so they now ingrain that bad habit. And so I know for me, deadlift was my best lift. And I had trouble trying to figure out how to brace properly and create more of a neutral spine. So I would think that's kind of a fundamental as well.
Yeah, and like the other part there, it's like not everyone is built to perform at an elite level on these lifts, right? Like some people may have to reach a point where they accept that like there's a 20, 30 kilo gap in my deadlift strength when I round my back versus when I lift with a neutral spine. And so therefore rounding my back is a better strategy in a meet. However, I realized that I probably can't do that for thousands of reps over the next decade without incurring some sort of damage to my spine. And so maybe I need a more varied training strategy where I am doing more of my reps in neutral and I'm limiting how heavy I go with a rounded back to certain blocks and certain weeks of my blocks, rather than just relying on this for my development. And I think those are the types of decisions which can help someone to age in a more healthy way or to potentially have a higher risk for problems as they continue on with their powerlifting journey.
Yeah. And I think the decision making you mentioned as well, I think maybe that's a little bit more advanced. Maybe it's not like a complete beginner fundamental. I feel like maybe earlier on in a lot of sports, the coach might be making more decisions and then over time giving more and more decisions to the athlete, especially, if it's a sport where there's not a lot of stoppages, like let's say in hockey or whatever, there may be a lot of decisions that the players have to make on the ice in the moment because it's just things that are happening in real time and you have to decide, okay, do I pass? Do I shoot? Do I throw it onto the boards or whatever? And you have other players in certain positions in certain sports, like let's say a quarterback in football, that maybe takes the coach's decision, but then based on what they're seeing, they may make adjustments. And I think even in individual sports that does happen, like in tennis, it's very back and forth. You have to make decisions in the moment. Maybe for like a long distance runner, depending on what strategy the other competitors are doing or the position you're in, you may have to make adjustments. So I think, yeah, over time, it is beneficial for a lifter to understand a little bit of the programming, a little bit of game day planning, a little bit of technique and what's going on, the reasoning for the coach doing a certain thing, so that then they can make the decisions in the moment when they need to.
Yeah, I think there's some things which are more advanced. Like I'd consider being able to utilize velocity based training or RPE based training is like quite advanced relative to being disciplined to show up when you don't want to and um, not going off program. Um, if something is painful, don't continue to provoke it. Like communicate and stop and let your coach know. Don't abuse painkillers. Like these are important decisions that people either do or don't make, which can shape how their careers play out to some degree. And yeah, so I see what you mean that like some of it is advanced, but like also there's a lot of low hanging fruits that can benefit a lifter early on in their development too.
Yeah, some of those things you mentioned, it made me think of like what my athletes do, and it's like I'll sometimes get a message from a client like, "Oh, well, my video didn't film my top single, so I did it again." And I'm like, "No, don't do it again. You did it. You followed the program. Who cares if we don't have the video? We'll get a video another time." But they had to do the single again so they can get the video for me. And it's just like, yeah, some of those things, I guess, like better decision making would lead to better results.
Yeah, and I think it's hard too because to tie this all back to my opening statement on the dose response relationship as it relates to load tolerance. Oftentimes, I think powerlifters don't realize the consequences for their actions until their actions have accumulated for a certain period of time. And then it becomes a problem. And so, like, an argument that I don't like is show a deadlift with awful form in a young athlete and say, oh, this athlete lifted this incredible amount of weight with horrible form. Therefore, you don't need to have good form. You could just lift however you want, and nothing bad will happen to your back. Is kind of the spirit of that argument. And it's like, well, probably not. Like there's a chance, there's a probability that that athlete may be able to lift that way all throughout their career and not sustain damage. But I think if you were playing the odds, there's probably a greater likelihood that if that athlete lifted that way regularly for numerous repetitions, that over time, there's a higher risk of injury there. And so just because they could do it once doesn't mean it's okay for all time. And you just ignore it and move on. And I think sometimes it's easy to be dismissive of an athlete's technique and the importance of it, and just say like, "Ah, it's all about load management," and let's just keep getting strong, and the body will adapt. But from what I've seen, a lifter's lifestyle, their technique, their training load, um, their decision making, like all of that stuff really tends to shape who has more prosperous careers and who doesn't.
Yeah, it's a sign of how great I think the human body is, because if you think about things like outside lifting, think about someone who could like smoke for decades or drink for decades, and they're doing something that's wrong, and we all know it's something that's bad for the body, but the body is just so resilient, it can handle it for so many years before finally like it breaks, whatever. And sometimes it takes the person to get to that point where the doctor says, hey, if you keep doing this, you're going to die in the next few years. Then they're like, okay, and they quit and make the complete change. So it's the same thing. Like, hey, you may be doing something for lifting or a certain type of programming that maybe works for 1 week or works for 1 month, or hits one PR, and you think it's like, hey, I'm doing this amazing thing, but it could just be that your body is so resilient that, like, despite maybe a poor decision, your body's able to not get injured. But in the future, if you keep doing it, it may lead to an injury.
Yeah, I like that comparison a lot.
Now, the next thing I want to ask you is, again, let's go to like an example scenario of an athlete that you have that you are training, and they do end up having some kind of injury. Let's say they have some kind of knee pain, or like they have some kind of herniated disc in their back, or something pops up that they have to then kind of adjust the training strategy. How do you go now about changing that strategy and kind of getting them back to healthy?
Yeah. Um, so I think the initial response is I have to meet that with urgency, with empathy, um, and possibly with an immediate collaboration with Emily, our staff injury management expert, um, to ask her, like, do you think this lifter is safe to do any sort of training at all for this region or these movement patterns in the next few days? And if they aren't, then the lifter's got to rest and go to physio. If they are, I'm going to use my skills with strength and conditioning and with injury management. Uh, I think this is one of the great benefits of being a part of TSG, is how much access we all get to learning about how Emily works. So we have enhanced injury management skills because of our collaborative culture. We get to work with Emily and learn a thing or two each time. So I'll use my skills to modify the program for the athletes so that they're not lifting in pain levels that are unacceptable for their condition. I use a guide that Emily made for TSG coaches on, like, if it's likely to be this problem or this problem, this is the acceptable symptoms, and this is probably what's unacceptable. Uh, and I err on the side of caution with my loading as well. So if someone uh, herniates a disc in their back, there's really a spectrum of different ways that could go. They could be like debilitated, or they could still be functional and training, right? Or anywhere in between. And that's a tricky one to take apart. And then within that spectrum, they could also have inhibition shooting into their legs or not, right? So you get different you get different problems for different injuries. So I try to uh, ask a lot of questions when I talk to athletes. Like, athletes sometimes will, just because we communicate online and not in person, they shoot me a message to update me on what's happened, and they leave out some details here or there. Whereas I find in person through conversation, I'm able to get a better understanding more quickly. And so my antidote to that online is asking a lot of questions. to try to paint a picture of what's going on here and what modifications do you need. So I want my athlete to develop fitness and what they can develop fitness in. If they are really restricted, we may have to take training down to the studs and just do some simple isolation exercises that are tolerable. They may not even have motion. It may just be like isometric to try to maintain some sort of fitness in the area and stimulus for the area. And then collaborate with the rehab professional to build moving forward. Now, the thing is that if an athlete has a small, simple shoulder ache or something, and that resolves itself within a few weeks, with consistent training, they may not have issues in that shoulder again or for many years on end. So that injury didn't really impair their capacity to train bench moving forward. But if an athlete has a year-long battle with the shoulder injury, then it's like that's probably more likely to crop up again in the future. And so we need to move forward more carefully instead of going back to how we were before. Instead, we need to move forward thinking about number one, the capacity of that athlete's shoulder, which hurt them for a year, is probably lower than before. So training may need to be modified so that we're not stressing it to the point where it breaks down again. Number two, we also need to be careful of what compensations may arrive due to that injury. So let's say athlete has a bum shoulder for a year or a bum adductor, for example. I'll do the shoulder first, then I'll do the adductor. So with the shoulder, is the bar now sitting differently on their back in squat than before? Are they rotating that shoulder forward? If so, then there's going to be a different stress that's being imposed on the low back, hips, knees, and ankles as a result of that shoulder injury. And this may lead to other issues which may be related at some level to that original shoulder injury. If an athlete has a bum adductor, they may transfer more of the load demands onto their hamstrings or onto their quads. And so, are we looking at potentially an injury to the other side being a higher risk in the future, or an injury to the back? It's not just about the injury that they had, it's also about the injuries that may happen in the future. And so I think these situations where we're dealing with injury management need to be handled with great care, rather than the mindset of I'm out of pain, I'm good to get back at it. Because I read a line from someone whose work I respect a lot. His name's Matt Jordan, and it said something along the lines of rest may make you feel better, but it does not mean that you are better. Uh, and it's this idea of when you have injuries happen, you need to take great care and consideration with potentially modifying how you do things moving forward. Otherwise, they may continue to crop up. And I feel like that's something that I've had to learn through my career and through our style of training the hard way at times as well. Regrettably, you know.
Yeah, I like this idea that you kind of said, like, when someone's injured, especially with online coaching, it's hard to know we weren't there for it. So it's almost like you become a detective. It's like, okay, let me ask all the questions of how it happened. And right now, how much pain are you in? And is it pain while you're lifting or when you're not lifting? Is it pain while you're trying to sleep at night? Is it so bad that you're immobile? Like I've had some friends who've like herniated disc and they're just like on a couch for a week. They can't move. Versus, like you said, there might be someone who kind of like tweaked their shoulder or something like that while they're doing a bench press rep. And then after a week or two, they're like, oh, well, the pain went away. I'm back to normal. So it's, it's a huge spectrum of what the injury is and how they're feeling. And so like trying to collect as much information as possible gets us a good start. And then, like you said, working with some kind of physical therapist or injury management coach, whether it's on our team with Emily or if someone has someone local to kind of get maybe more of a diagnosis from a medical professional to kind of understand what's going on. And I like the chart as well that we now share with our mentorship as well of like, hey, if you think or know that it's this injury, then this is kind of like the symptoms that are okay or not okay. And these are the pain levels that are okay or not okay throughout the day or while lifting, so that you can kind of get an idea of how to then adjust the training to kind of fit in those numbers.
Yeah, I think my other thoughts on injury management are, I had the pleasure of collaborating with Canadian legend, Dr. Stuart McGill, um, about 2 months ago. And that was a really inspiring experience to see the depth of his expertise in practice. Um, I really took a lot from that consult, and I'm very grateful for it. And one of the things that he said is pain generally begets more pain. And I think that's a simple way of saying what my previous statement said in more words. I think the uh, other thing with injury is how you view it. And um, I think when you have injuries, obviously it's a setback. It's not a positive experience to go through, but there is opportunity there as well. And sometimes you need to look quite hard for the opportunity. So the opportunity could be to improve at how you speak to yourself during hard times, to reflect on what led you to the circumstances that you're in and consider what changes you may want to make moving forward, um, so that you're potentially doing and feeling better in life moving forward once you're out of pain. I think it's a chance sometimes to prioritize other lifts. And I think it's also something that can guide you towards becoming more of a master of your own training process. Because I think an ideal response to an injury is to learn from it uh, in collaboration with one or two experts, a coach, a physio, etc., and through one's own reflection. And to consider that their rehab plan for that injury needs to be more than just a few physio exercises or a few manual therapy treatments. Something else that Dr. McGill taught. This is a holistic rehab plan. Like, let's consider how you're moving outside of the gym. Like, when you're tying your shoe, when you're rolling over in bed, like in relation to a back injury, if an athlete is irritating their back constantly throughout the day, when they turn around to talk to someone, and then they show up to training with an irritated back, that training session's probably going to be garbage because your back's already irritated before you even started warming up. And so you've got to stop irritating it outside of training. Otherwise, we're not really leaving much space to have any sort of a quality training session later in the day. And then you need to consider how you move so that that area is stiff, it's stable, uh, it's aligned in such a way where maybe you don't have pain consistently, um, the workload of your program, and then, yeah, you also want to consider what exercises you're doing and possibly some manual therapy as well. But I feel like the view of physio is so narrow. It's so narrow minded. It's like, I'm going to go to a physio because they've got the magic 2 to 3 exercises that I need to be doing to feel better. And actually, I think a more mature way of looking at injury is like, okay, like, how did I arrive here? What all do I need to change and how I'm going about my life, about my actions, my decisions, and in my program to get better and to go on healthily.
Yeah, I have to agree there. And sometimes it's not even just the prehab exercises people will do going forward. There's some people out there that maybe think, oh, I'll just do these rehab exercises with my PT for 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, they say I'm back to normal, and then they'll stop doing those exercises and just kind of move on. Versus, like you said, the approach of trying to learn from what happened. And like you said, you can learn in different ways of how to maybe make better decisions going forward, maybe how to change different things in your life to try and improve how are you going to perform in the gym, reduce life stress, those kind of things. And then, like you said as well, maybe getting more involved with your coach and understanding what's going on. And so you can maybe try and figure out when things may be being like the same situation, like, oh, it's kind of leading to the same things that happened last time I got injured. And so maybe I should communicate with my coach more and figure out ways to adjust things. Um, and even like you said, during that time, you can focus on other things. So if you tweaked your knee, maybe you can focus more on your bench press and be able to still hit some bench press PRs while you're rehabbing the knee, and then come back and make the adjustments necessary to then bring your squat and deadlift back up as well. So a lot of different areas that someone can focus on when they're going through the injury and after the injury, where they can learn, become better, and hopefully, be better than they were before. A lot of people think like, hey, once I had that first injury, it's over. And it's not the case. A lot of people come back stronger and better than ever. So being able to kind of go through that process and think through those things can lead to that result.
Yeah, I think like Greg Lehman is a physio who's very well known, and he had a quote saying something to the effect of, injuries always happen because the stress we imposed on a tissue exceeded its capacity to handle that stress. And we could either impose a really high magnitude stress on a tissue. So like if I walk out across the street and get hit by a car, I'm probably going to get injured, right? In powerlifting, that tends not to happen so much, but it is possible to a degree. You have a freak accident, something goes. Most injuries in powerlifting seem to be due to repetitive stress, where maybe something that you tolerate for days, weeks, blocks, years on end, and then something that you normally do one day, probably more likely during a higher intensity training session, suddenly you feel a pop or an ache or a pain arise. And in that area where you had that discomfort arise, I think there's some questions you need to consider. So, first of all, that's the area that broke down first, right? Like that you exceeded its capacity and now it's injured. Uh, the first question is, why did that happen? Like, why were you moving in such a way that that area became overloaded? The second question is, now that that area is overloaded, what other areas may become overloaded as a result of you moving differently to try to navigate the pain that you're in? And I think you just need to take a step back and consider doing things differently, because problems arise when you try to do the same thing over and over again in that situation and expect a different result. And again, that's something that I had to learn the hard way. But I feel like I've really worked hard and improved a lot my skills as a coach at helping athletes to manage injuries. And although it's a negative experience for both of us in a way, um, it's an area that I have become passionate about because, number one, I care about people, not only physically, but mentally. And I want them to be well. And number two, um, it's very interesting to dig into the biomechanics and the physiology of injury and consider how you need to modify the strategy and go forward. And it's very satisfying to figure that puzzle out and then find success after these significant injuries have happened. Like I still think that like some of the best work our group has ever done um, be Taylor's comeback at 2024 Nationals. Was 25 in Atlanta. I think it was 2025. Uh, after the compensatory injuries that he battled, and then also Leah's comeback to 2023 and 24 Sheffield after she herniated a disc in her back. Like we went through these fires, and then we found a way to come out way stronger on the other end. And that's just as a practitioner, it's really satisfying to have those experiences.
Yeah, especially when it might be easy when things are going well and like, you're not running into any roadblocks or anything like that and you're having success. But then it's like another thing is like when you do hit that roadblock, how do you then bounce back and come back? So you were able to do that with Taylor and Leah, and Leah's training is an example that we have in our mentorship. So I wanted to mention that as well. We have our mentorship coming up. So these are some of the things that we go a lot more in depth into in our mentorship when we can do, 13 classes that are 2 hours long. Again, like we had mentioned at the beginning, sometimes with social media, it's hard to go over everything in depth. That's why we have the podcast. But then even more than the podcast, we have the mentorship where we really go into detail on all this stuff.
Yeah, our mentorship is something that this will now be its fourth edition. Each time we teach it, we make adjustments. Came out with it in 2023. I've easily poured over 500 hours of work into this. And I know you've put another couple hundred yourself, Arian. Um, it's it's not it's content that I wish I had when I was coming up and coaching. Um, and I think that's like the vision of why it's designed. It's like I wish I had access to this when I was desperately looking for answers. And I hope that helps to further the knowledge of the community at some level. And I hope it helps people to have the involvement in powerlifting that they wish to have. So, like, we very meticulously break down all of the aspects of coaching in our course, and it's something that's it's a special piece of work that continues to evolve over time, and yeah, it's something that we're very proud of at TSG and proud to share with others as well.
Yeah, agreed. I know when I got into powerlifting, and even these days, you still have people always ask, like, hey, where do I start if I want to learn as a coach? What book should I read? Or what YouTube video should I watch? Or, what article should I read or something like that? And there's not a whole lot out there. Uh, even if someone has an exercise science degree, it maybe teaches you the fundamentals, but then sometimes some people struggle with transferring those fundamentals to something very specific, a specific sport. And so, like you said, like this is like something I wish I had, back in 2012 or 2013 when I was first coming up. So again, we'll have the link for that down in the description below. If you guys want to check it out, we have our next semester coming up, or if you just want to buy the pre-recorded lectures and go on your own pace, you can do that as well. Did you want to say anything else?
No,
Okay. Next thing I want to do is hop over to a little game that I started with Juliana, and so this game is basically whether you would fire or hire this type of coach, and it's not necessarily just stating fire or hire, because obviously these things are going to be a little more nuanced. So you can give your kind of thoughts on why you would hire or fire this coach based on what exactly they're doing. So the first scenario is: would you hire or fire a coach who tries different new ideas with your training, but those ideas don't work?
Higher. And the reason why is because nothing tried and nothing learned. Like if you continue to do the same thing over and over again, you're not exploring whether there's something out there that could work better for you. However, I would like to see, I would like to understand the logic of how we went from trying option A to option B to option C. And I'd like to be able to step back and appreciate that, like, we're following a scientific process here and getting close to an answer.
Yeah, I agree. And, the more and more experienced the coach is, maybe they have more experience with specific situations that are similar to you as a client. But even then, that doesn't mean that like day one, they instantly know what works for you and you're going to be progressing right away. Sometimes it can take some weeks of figuring things out. But yeah, I would like to know for anything outside, even outside of powerlifting coaching. But yeah, with powerlifting coaching as well, like the person's telling me like, hey, we're trying option A because of this. And then after some number of weeks, okay, option A isn't working. Let's try option B now based on the information we gained off of option A. And then, okay, that's not working after a number of weeks, rather than just saying like, oh yeah, whatever, let's try this and see if it works. And obviously that's not a good reason for trying the idea necessarily. Next thing, would you hire or fire a coach that gives you a partial game plan, like just openers, or doesn't even give you a game plan, just has you do it yourself?
Fire. Um, Competition is where a coach largely proves their merit. Um, I think the expectation should be improvement on competition day. And if you're not even going to put the thought into developing a strategy for me, I think it shows that you don't care. Uh, I think it shows that you're unprofessional. And it shows that you're not well considered either.
Yeah, I have to agree. And ideally, the coach doesn't leave it to like the day before or the week of. Is I like to think a number of weeks out. For example, like Masters Worlds is coming up in like 8 weeks. I've been trying to figure out whether I can be a coach to be a handler for my athlete there, or if I need to find someone else. So I think like the first step is like the coach discussing with the athlete whether they'll be at the competition or not. If not, can the coach may find a handler that they trust to assign to the athlete? If they can't, then can the athlete have like a friend or family member or someone come just to help load some weights and kind of keep track of the time? And then based on that information, the coach is going to have a game plan and how detailed that game plan is going to be for the athlete so they know the decision making they have to make if the coach is not going to be there. But yeah, there's times where I've seen it where I've handled athletes at like a national world championship or when I was a national team coach where the game plan was just like warm-ups and then the athlete would just figure out the temps on their own. Or it would be like the coach would give openers and maybe warm-ups and then it'd be like, oh yeah, you guys just figure out the second or thirds kind of based on how the day is going, which I can somewhat understand where they're coming from of like, hey, you don't know how the day's going to go, but I always still like to have what I call like a rough draft. Like in school, you're writing an essay, you may first write a rough draft, get feedback on it, and then do a final draft is like, here, let's have a rough draft of like what's most likely going to happen in the competition. And then we can adjust based if things are going better or worse.
I think there are some people who could pull that off, probably with high experience. However, if you are going to take an athlete who's nervous, loaded with adrenaline, and has 60 seconds to make a sound decision, while also like walking off the platform, like finding their stuff, maybe headphones, whatever they set on the ground before the attempt, and then like fumbling around looking for a pen and paper. If you're asking them to make a really sound and logical judgment and determine their success in that moment, I think that's not setting them up to succeed.
Yeah, and like you said, it may work, for example, if the coach and the athlete have known each other for many years and, have a lot of experience and the coach has a lot of experience. Hey, they can do things, kind of like instinctively. Like same thing if you're cooking a recipe that you've cooked like for years and years, like, oh, I know how to make pasta. I can eyeball the water and I can eyeball things. But then if it's like, yeah, you're working with an athlete that's like your first time doing a competition together, or the athlete's going without you, then you need more of that recipe and guiding them the right way because they're not going to be able to instinctively do that stuff.
It's like asking an athlete to time their own warm-ups too. Like they're they're not here thinking about how to do that in the best way. Like they're thinking about their lifts, and so you ask them like, "When do you want your next warm up? What's it going to be?" The first reaction is going to be they're going to look around the room and see how many reds their competitors have on the bar, and probably just say, "I'll do that." And it's just like this is really lackluster on the coach's part, in my view. Like it's very unprofessional to do that.
Yep. Next one, I think you might like this one as well. Would you hire or fire a coach that doesn't respond or work on weekends?
Higher. uh, because, as I said, I think there's five or less coaches who were prominent before 2016 who are still in this. Uh, if you were to anonymize coaching resumes for me and ask me who I choose, I would pick person with the most amount of experience, uh, with at least some level of knowledge in exercise science, hands down. Like I wouldn't pick someone who's brand new into coaching. Why would I do that? Uh, Although I'm grateful that people picked me way back when, because that's how I started. And yeah, I think coaches need rest too, to and they need to be able to live life outside of powerlifting so that they could show up in the ways that you need them when you need support from them. And I also think that coaches need time off to professionally develop. And if coaches are just chatbots, you know, answering, saying your lips look good, nice work, man, every 24 hours, 7 days a week. Number one, that coach is not going to have a sustainable career. Number two, they don't have time to develop. Number three, they're probably going to miss some pretty important details just because of the lack of order and professionalism in their work schedule. So I think coaches should take weekends off. I also think that um, coaches should be able to take vacation. I think that's a reasonable expectation. However, I think the client still needs to be cared for well while the coach is on vacation too. Um, Otherwise, I just think that we're not supporting both parties of the coach athlete relationship well. And I think that ultimately the coach's quality may suffer.
Yep. Yeah, I have to agree with you. Unless for some specific reason the coach puts in their services that they're available, on a particular weekend because maybe they want to take a weekday off instead, whatever, is that most people kind of understand that coaches are humans just like everyone else and they don't work at their job 24/7, 365, and so that they need time as well to work on other things or just to rest and recover, spend time with family, friends, those kinds of things. And so yeah, a coach should be able to say, hey, these are the days I normally work and these are the times I normally work in those days, and so I'll respond to you in a timely manner during those days and times, but then these other days and times are for me to work on other things, do my own training, spend time with family, rest and recover so I can then come back and do my job effectively.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of times people, because I have like friends that work more of a typical 9 to 5 corporate job, is that they always get mad when the boss try to makes them come on weekends or do work at home or extra stuff. And, oh, I'm not getting paid for overtime. I have to think about my job at home. But then they need to kind of think about it that way when it comes to their own coach. It's like, hey, do I really need to be bothering my coach, Saturday at 9 a.m. for something that's not even an emergency or anything that's urgent? They can kind of get back to me on Monday about it. And so sometimes we have to kind of think about like, being in the coach's shoes and what we expect of them versus what we expect of ourselves with our own job.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. There's the hours that I spend at work, but then also like if someone has a problem, like there's countless hours where I've just laid in bed awake at night thinking about it, and it's like I'm not at work physically, but I'm at work mentally. And I told Ben yesterday, like when I was in my 20s, because I've had some personal life hardships recently. Uh, when I was in my 20s, I worked 7 days a week, no problem. Uh, and I would crush myself to grow the company. And the company largely did well. And I was able to sustain that for like a decade. But I'm approaching 15 years doing this now full time. And I told him, it's like, well, when I try to do that now, it crushes me back. Like I have to be able to take time and go do woodworking and go train myself and go play disc golf and these other things that I like, these other hobbies. Otherwise, I'm just constantly, even if I'm not physically at work, I'm mentally at work, and it doesn't age in a desirable way. From my experience.
Yeah, it's a same thing I think a lot of people experience as they get older. Like maybe they could drink and stay up late and eat junk food a lot when they were in like college or whatever. And now when they're in their 30s, 40s, or 50s, like, no, I can't do that. If I have more than 2 drinks or whatever, I'm just going to feel miserable for the next day. Or if I stay up past, midnight, I'm just going to feel miserable the next day. So the same thing as a coach is like maybe early on in your life or when you have less things to worry about. If you're not married, with kids and different things like that, then okay, you can put more time and effort into the coaching and you can kind of get away with it. As you get older and older, you're like, I can't get away with this anymore.
Yeah, it's essentially that, and so I think it's good to give a coach their time off and to respect them as a person instead of only as a service provider.
Yep. So that's my little game. I'm glad I agree with your answers. I mean they're pretty easy responses there, but it's always I think it's gonna be interesting hearing the nuance of like what different coaches say, Juliana versus you versus whoever else I have on the podcast in the future. For those listening, as always, you can leave your comments below. Give us your thoughts on what you thought about this episode with Jason and kind of what we discussed, and maybe also what topics you'd like for us to discuss in the future. As always, you can leave us a 5 stars on Spotify. Help us get this podcast out to more and more people. Jason, as always, thank you again for coming back on, gracing us with all your thoughts and some new things for people to think about for that are listening to this episode.
Thank you for having me, Arian.
Yep, no problem. And we'll catch you guys on another episode of the TSG podcast. Bye.